All right, let's do attendance. So this being Constitution Week, kind of nice to have a quote from the Constitutional Convention, which of course they didn't call the Constitutional Convention because they didn't know they were making a constitution. It was just called the Federal Convention. And Federal Convention in 1787 is kind of interesting. First of all, it takes a while for enough delegates from the different states to arrive to actually be able to conduct business. So after a couple of weeks after it's supposed to start, there's finally enough folks there to start. And the kind of interesting thing happens is that kind of already Virginia, the delegation from Virginia has kind of been working the other delegates that are already there before the convention even starts to kind of convince them that they've got a plan. It's known as the Virginia Plan. And as soon as they convene, Edmund Randolph from Virginia presents the Virginia Plan. And a lot of what we have in the Constitution today comes from the Virginia Plan. And after the Virginia Plan was presented, there was almost a sense of euphoria among the delegates. It was like, wow, this is good. I mean, it's maybe not perfect, but we're going to be out of here in a couple of weeks. So they're thinking, yeah, this is going to be great. This is in May. But Virginia, of course, is a big state. And so it said or votes representation in the federal government is proportional to the population. Well, after Virginia presents their plan, New Jersey, a small state, says, "Oh, hold on a second, Mr. Big State, we've got a plan too." So we get the New Jersey plan gets presented. We then also have North Carolina plan, which is very, very similar to the Virginia plan. And then Alexander Hamilton himself. By this time, Alexander Hamilton's two fellow delegates have given up; they've left. He stays behind and he says, "I got a plan too." So we have kind of vigorous discussion after the first three plans. Alexander Hamilton presents his plan. Everyone listens quietly as he basically says, Great Britain's got it figured out. We should do what Great Britain does. Except essentially, we're not going to have a king. We're going to have a president who is elected for life. So it won't be hereditary, but it will be a life appointment. Everyone very politely listened, and then there was absolutely no discussion. That's not even worth talking about. We'll just move on. But by the time we got to this point, now it's like, oh man, there's so much to go here. So they set off. They said, let's get a committee of detail, give us some kind of starting point. And then they really got down to work, kind of working over that first draft. And it started, they were into it about 7-8 weeks when Benjamin Franklin suggests this. He says, and there was starting to be a sense of maybe we're gonna end without ever coming to an agreement, because there were big issues. What was probably the biggest issue of the Constitutional Convention? Do you know what it was? Slavery, yeah, for sure. We're discussing slavery, and we think there's no way through. We can't come to an agreement on this. And it's kind of during those kind of dark days that Franklin says, I'm not sure how it is that we have kind of gotten to this point and we haven't been invoking the blessings of the Almighty on our daily. During the Second Continental Congress, when they gave us the Declaration of Independence, they started every day with prayer. And so he says, how is it that we're here to this situation and now, we're not starting with prayer? And he says, maybe we should begin with prayer. And he says, I have lived, sir, a long time. The longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And so, kind of after he suggests this, they take a vote. By the way, do you know what they did? Did they start praying after this? You don't know the story. They don't. They essentially, the argument that seemed to carry the day was, well, we haven't been praying so far. This is a really bad argument, by the way. We haven't been praying so far, and now if we start praying, people are going to get the idea that we really need God's help, apparently, which they do, but they didn't want other folks to know that, apparently. So they ended up not doing it. But that notwithstanding, I think it's clear, at least from the doctrine of our church, that God's hand was involved in the creation of the Constitution. All right. So let's go ahead and save. I do want to save. Get into the content for today. So I think for the first time, we're starting with a workbook that already has stuff in it. So, and we have some other administrative stuff to do, but let's go ahead and remember that the way that you get to where the files are, the starting files for this course, and we do have a starting file, is this link right here, or you just remember it's VBA-course.blogspot.com, or you bookmark that anyway. And then come to today, September 13th, and then that's the file to download. So that's where we're going to start there. And of course, if we look at these other ones, hopefully I've got them posted already. Yeah, so as we go back to these other ones, that's where you'll see the videos from those various days right there. Now, last time we were together, I tried to install the add-in and kind of use the add-in here on the Podium computer. And when I tried to use it, it just crashed Excel. It wasn't the add-in that was crashing Excel. It was the Sophos malware protection software that is on this Podium computer saying, Excel is doing something that I think it shouldn't be doing. And it said that this looks like it's doing something very dangerous. And the add-in was doing something that, I was looking at it, I don't really blame Sophos for thinking that what I was doing in the add-in was dangerous. I was actually creating a file on the hard disk and then running the file kind of automatically. And so I've adapted that code so that Sophos no longer complains about it. And I've reposted a new version of the add-in. So if your add-in works, if you've submitted your homework to the add-in, you are golden. You won't need to worry about making a change. If you had the same problem I had, hopefully it was because of Sophos or some other similar anti-malware software that was saying that looks dangerous and stopping you. In that case, you should be able to follow this video, which takes you through getting set up for this course. And now we've got the Atlas VBA 1.5. Oh, I called it 1.5a. It's not a very good name, but there it is. Anyway, this is a new version of that file that hopefully will work for you. If you are in that situation and you try to install this one, it still doesn't work, come and see me and we'll get something figured out. How many of you are in a situation where you said, yeah, my Excel was crashing? Oh, no one? Oh, okay, so, oh, Ella. So hopefully that'll work for you. And you don't need to do it like right now during class. You won't be relying on it for class, but for the next assignment you will. Okay, so today, what is the topic for today? Today is working with built-in objects, working with built-in objects and collections of objects. So we talked about what an object was the first day. Who can tell me, remind me what an object is? Yeah, object's a thing. It's anything that we can manipulate through VBA code. And objects have two characteristics that are really important to us. See if you can name one of those characteristics. Just yell it out. Objects have properties, and the other one is objects have methods. Yeah, property is just some little bit, it's like a variable built into the object. It's some value that describes something about the way the object is, whereas a method is what? Something the object can do. Yeah, it's an activity the object can do. Good. And so we're going to be working with some of the built, so there's collections of objects all over Excel. We call these the built-in objects. And so we are going to kind of see how do we work with some of those today. All right, so I just have my immediate window open. This is an XLS, well, it's an XLSM file, but there's no code in it already. So I'm just going to come here and open up my Visual Basic editor. Of course, you can go to the Developer tab and just click on Visual Basic. You can press Alt F11 any way that you want to get there. And then if I was recording a macro, it would automatically create a module to hold the code. In this case, I'm starting from scratch. There's no place to hold that code yet. And so I'm going to come to my immediate window. I'll choose Insert Module, and that will give me the place to write my code. So I've got a module here that will hold the VBA code that I'm writing today. So inside my editor, Insert Module, and then I should be ready. Are we set up and ready to go? Anyone kind of having difficulties getting to this point? Question? Oh, the immediate window. Yeah, remember that immediate window is just a place that I can kind of just run some code like print active workbook dot name. The immediate window just allows me to just execute a line of code without having to put it in a module and run the module. The way I get it is by choosing View, Immediate Window. Control G is the shortcut key that brings that up. It normally will show up at the bottom of your screen. I have it at the top just so it's easier for folks in the back to see. Question? Should you download the Excel sheet that I have open? And the answer is, if you want to follow along with everything I'm doing today, the answer is yes. Yeah. So, right. You know how to get to it? Oh, yeah, yeah. So Yeah, so I'm not putting these files individually on the day in the schedule, and it's because I've put them on that blog to kind of go with the videos. And the link to that is on day one of the schedule. If you go back to the schedule, go to day one, there's like files and videos for this course. That'll take you to the blog, and then you find the day over on the left, and then that's the one. Other questions? Okay. So we're going to be working with kind of various built-in objects that you end up needing to work with. Now, the vast majority of the time that we're working with code in this class, we will be working with code in a single workbook. But it's really, really common to say, listen, I'm going to have code in one workbook that's manipulating objects in a different workbook. Maybe even creating workbooks, finding existing workbooks, opening them, closing them, and so forth. And so there's a whole kind of set of tools for working with other workbooks. So let me just make a sub procedure here. I'll just call this built-in objects. Maybe we'll do everything in this one. Maybe we'll make some more, I don't know. Built-in objects. Okay. So let's just kind of talk about what some of these objects are. Let me come up here to my immediate window. And let's see, I'm printing here active workbook.name. First thing to realize, there's even a higher level than the workbook that we usually just assume for us, and that's called the application. So I can say application.activeworkbook.name, print the application's activeworkbook.name. So application is the highest level object that we have in Excel, and it refers to Excel itself. So if I want to deal with a property of Excel, I mean, that's kind of like, that is like the mother of all built-in objects. It's the whole Excel. And there are properties that I might be interested in. Here's a property of Excel that ends up being really interesting. So let me print, instead of the active workbook's name, application.displayAlerts. So display alerts is just a property of the application object. It says, listen, when I'm working with, kind of working with Excel, doing something that Excel would normally put up a message, and right now, display alerts, put up the alerts that normally when you, see, how do we say this? When you're doing something in Excel that Excel thinks, are you really sure you want to do that? Like deleting a worksheet. When you delete a worksheet, Excel says, are you really sure you want to do this? Right? You know the dialog box comes up and you say, yes, I'm really sure. How many of you are annoyed by that dialog box? Yeah, from time to time, yeah. Well, actually, if you use VBA to tell it to delete a worksheet, it still pops up that message box, which is terrible. Because what if you just wanted your code knows it has to be deleted? You definitely don't want your user saying cancel. Yeah, don't do that. You just want to delete it. By default, when you delete a worksheet, it's going to put that message up. You want to see that? Let's go ahead and do that. Let me make a worksheet. And maybe I'll just go ahead and leave this. I wasn't going to jump into worksheets right away, but let's go ahead and do it. So let's just do this. There's a collection. We'll spell the whole thing out. Application. Dot active workbook. Dot worksheets. Dot add. Okay. So we don't actually have to say application. If we don't say application, VBA is going to assume you mean Excel. It's possible for us to have like two different instances of Excel open. One would be called application. One would be called some other name we'd have to give it. So there are times when you need to manipulate this, but we'll never do it in this class. So we could skip that. We could also skip the active workbook, because if you don't tell it which workbook you're talking about, it's going to assume you mean the active workbook. I'm going to kind of specify this out because we're talking about built-in objects today. And so what is this line going to do? What do you think? I'm going to create a new worksheet. Now, so let's just go ahead. I'm going to run that, and we should see, well, let me come up here and say worksheets dot count. Okay, so a worksheet is an object. It's one of these sheets down here. It has properties and methods. Worksheets, plural, is also an object. It's a special kind of an object called a collection. Collections usually have a common set of a common base set of properties and methods. And one of the methods or one of the properties that all collections have is a property called count. Because all a collection is, it's a kind of a holder that holds references to other objects. So the worksheets object just holds a reference to all of the worksheets in the given chart or in the given workbook that we're on. So I should be able to ask how many worksheets there are. Let me print this. And it will tell me there are 3 worksheets in this workbook. Is that right? I've got past statistics. I got one called charts. I've got one called sheet 1. Yeah, that's it. There's just 3. So now when I run this code, and then I run, this one that counts it again, now suddenly we have 4 because I added a new sheet. Okay, so now let's go ahead and delete that sheet. Now, when I add a sheet, it's going to become the active sheet. So I can just say active sheet dot delete. Okay, so now when I run this, it's going to add a sheet, and then it's going to print off how many sheets there are, and then it's going to try to delete the sheet that it just added. Right? We know that's the one that it just added because it's a byproduct of adding the sheet that it becomes the active sheet. And we don't have any other code happening in between here that's going to change that. So when I run this, so this is the message box that comes up when you go to delete a sheet. Microsoft Excel will permanently delete this sheet. Do you want to continue? Now, if the user says cancel here, and I'm expecting my code to have deleted that sheet, that's a problem. I do not want my user saying cancel here. Well, this behavior here is a property. I'm going to go ahead and say delete. This is driven by the property called display alerts. So right now, display alerts is true, but I can come in here and I can say display alerts equals false. So now, if I've told Excel, if I've set a property at the Excel object that says, don't display these alerts, and I tell it to delete, it's just going to say, okay, I'm not going to warn you about this. You must know what you're doing. And it's just going to go ahead and delete it. So now, let me go ahead and print the count. Print the count twice. I'll clear out my immediate window. That's where the printing goes to. So now this should create a sheet. It added a sheet, put the count, told the alerts to be off so we don't get the notification, deleted the sheet, we didn't get the notification, and then we went back down to 4. Now, I've run the code that says display alerts is false. What if I come to sheet 2 and delete it? Have I turned that off like for the whole application? Well, first question is display alerts still false? What if I come up here and just ask, what if I come up here and ask, is it still on display alerts? And the answer is, because I set this inside this sub-procedure, when this code is done running, it goes back to display alerts as the default setting. It turns it back on. So now, if I delete this, it's going to permanently delete that. Yeah, I mean, it's prompting me, right? That's the whole point. So you don't have to worry about turning this off and saying, well, I better turn it back on when I'm done because it's just for this run of your code. Okay. In the back, question. Is that the same for screen updating? And the answer is, when we talk about screen updating, let me just, so you already know about screen updating, we haven't really talked about it yet. I think we talked briefly about it, right? We said the most expensive, last time we were together, I think, the most expensive computers we have are ones that can update the screen really, really fast. And that's because the process of updating the screen is computationally expensive. And so we have the ability to kind of turn screen updating on and off to be able to improve performance. If I'm doing something that changes back and forth between sheet, change this sheet, change this sheet, change this sheet, change this sheet, if every time it has to redraw the screen, it will probably take dramatically longer to do the screen updating part than it will to do the actual data manipulation I'm doing on those different screens. And so another property of the application object of Excel is called screen update. And so right now, screen updating is set to true. Let's just go ahead and set it to false. So down here in my code, application.screenUpdating equals false. Now, we're not really doing anything here that would make a difference with what the screen is doing, but we'll run that. And the real question is, what is screen updating right now? And it's back to true. So it's set it to false, but it's only for the current run of the code. And once that code is done running, it goes back to its normal place. It'd be pretty bad if you could turn screen updating off altogether. It's like, you're moving to a different cell and it's not showing you which cell you select a different sheet. It doesn't even show you what sheet you're on. So fortunately, yeah, that reverts as well. Question here in the front.
So if you set it outside of the sub-procedure, would it also go back to normal after it's executed? So for example, like you said in this one, it's done inside the sub-procedure.
Yeah.
So once it's done executing, it goes back.
Yeah, so let me go ahead and repeat the question. So, okay, so what if we didn't set it inside the sub-procedure? What if we set it outside the sub-procedure? And the answer is you can't set it outside the sub-procedure. All executable code has to be inside of a sub-procedure. Yeah, so it's not, yeah, so if I made it sound like, well, because we did it inside the sub-procedure, at the end of the sub-procedure, it's done. It's actually at the end of the current run of the code. So if the code runs some other sub-procedure, it's still going to be in effect, even though the other sub-procedure is running. Then when it comes back, when the code is done running, things revert. Question here.
What if you would have put that in the immediate window?
Oh, what if I was to actually just come up here and say screen updating? The answer is, I don't know the answer to that. Let's try it. Set it to false, and that code is done running and it immediately goes back to true. So, but we could come here and say, we should be able to see that it actually is off. So let's just print screen updating. So I think we will see that it actually is off when it runs. Yeah, so we're printing out here, we're setting it to false, and then we're asking what it is. So it actually is off, but by the time we're done running the thing, it's going to be reverted back to true. And I guess we don't, yeah, I guess you can believe me. We don't need to prove it that it's back to true. It's back to true. Question in the back.
I think you touched on this a little bit, but I missed it. How do we know when not to use application prior to like?
Okay. Yeah. So the question is, when do we have to use application and when do we not have to use application? Because I think I said, you could just say active workbook.worksheets.add without the application in front of it, and it would figure it out. So the answer to that is it's not a really simple answer, but here's the answer. Remember that the whole philosophy of the language of VBA is that when you try to execute some code, it's going to try, if it doesn't fully understand what you mean, it's going to try to guess. And all those times when it's guessing, somebody had to say, we're anticipating someone doing this wrong. So the language itself has to say, all right, in this situation, when they give us something malformed, let's guess at what they really mean. And so they said, listen, if we've got something called active workbook, if we just see active workbook by itself, that's something that is kind of common enough that we're going to anticipate that and say, well, active workbook is a property of the application object. I got Excel open. One of the workbooks in Excel is active right now. Which one is it? It's a property of that object. But what if they just give us that property without specifying the object? Then they said, the interpreter goes, okay, well, if they just gave us that property, we're going to check to see, is it the application? It's not going to check property of any other object. It's going to check when it sees that property bare by itself without an object in front of it. it's going to say, is it part of the application object? It's going to try that. It goes, yeah, that's one I recognize, application object. And so that one's used enough that that's one we want to anticipate. Now, what can we just, so that's a property that we can refer to without the application in front of it. In fact, let me just go ahead and do that in the immediate window. And I do see your hand there in the back. I'll get to you in just a second. And I can also print, let's put application in front of it. That's the same thing. So we should also be able to print application dot display alerts. Let's spell it right. But do we expect that one to work? I don't expect it to work. I don't know if I've ever tried it by itself. Yeah, it doesn't know what display alerts is. And it's just because they never ever said, if you just put display alerts, maybe they mean the display alerts property application object will make that mean what it means. And it was just never written. They just never anticipated that one. And so, yeah, so is there like a easy rule to know when you should use application, when you shouldn't? No. Well, but you always can put application. It's never wrong to put application. So you could always just put it. Okay, there was a question in the back. It's a good question. So what if we have multiple workbooks open? Are they all active? I mean, is that what it means? And I'm going to get to that here when we talk about the workbook collection. So we're hitting that here next. Okay, anything else on the application object? There are lots and lots of properties of the application object. These two are the two that I use way more often than any other. It is to kind of manipulate the screen updating. And we could use that to actually make it so that when we were running that macro before, that we could say, all right, update the screen right now and kind of show, now that we know that it's gone through the loop once and it's brought in the ticker symbol, the ticker information for one symbol, we could say, turn the updating screen on, turn it right back off, and it would just update that one. And so instead of waiting till the whole thing is done to see it, we could see it come in one line at a time. And then we've already talked about display alerts. Okay, so now then let's make sure that we get this. Okay, so right now when this runs, it doesn't change how many worksheets we have because it adds a sheet and then it deletes it. So I'm going to leave this code the way it is. So now let's look at the workbooks collection. So application.workbooks.count. This will tell us how many workbooks are in the collection. Now, how many workbooks do you think I have on this computer? We're not going to count ones that might be in my fellow professors' accounts to which I don't have access when they log into this machine. So just in my account, there's probably every workbook we've ever saved in this class, which isn't that many. It's the attendance workbook. There's 5 or 6 workbooks on this computer. So I'm going to print this. Okay, here we go. Printing. In fact, why don't we go ahead? I'm just going to, since we've got a lot of things getting printed out here, I'm just going to put a label in front of this. So I'm going to print a string literal that has the value that I'm printing. I'll put a colon and a space after that. And then I've got the string literal here, just a collection of characters, and then the actual value. But print only allows a single argument. So I can't give it 2 things to print. Actually, I can. And the way that I separate that is if I put a semicolon between those two, it says, okay, just print the one, then print the other. Actually, maybe better, I would just concatenate them. This is something we're already familiar with. I'll just take those 2 things, glue them together, print it out. Okay, so that tells me, even though I've got like 5 or 6 workbooks available to me, the number of workbooks in my workbooks collection is just 1. Why? So what does that mean? Yeah, the workbook, to get into the workbooks collection, you've got to be open in this instance of Excel. And so if I was to open another workbook, then I would have two. So, and this is going to get us to the question of how many of those are then active. So it is not being open that makes it active. So let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and add another one. Maybe just before we do this. Okay, so we talked about collections. Collections, and you have collections of workbooks, collections of worksheets, collections of charts, collections of like objects, collections of pictures on your sheet. Every collection has a count. Most collections have an add method. So I can say application workbooks.add. That method now just creates a brand new workbook. So I'm going to run this code. And I've got a new workbook up here. And my workbook count is 2. I should have cleared out my immediate window before I ran it. That's the one that it just printed. But there's only one workbook inside any given instance of Excel that's currently running. And folks, it's actually somewhat difficult to get 2 instances of Excel running simultaneously on your computer. So if you just want to think there's only ever one workbook, that's a one active workbook, that's healthy. So how many active workbooks are there? 1. Which one is active? What do you think? Which one's the active workbook? Yeah, the one that's in front. It's the last one that you actually had active. Now, right now, neither of those workbooks has the focus. In other words, when I start typing, letters don't go to either one of those. They're going over here to VBA. But whichever one last had the focus is going to be the one that's active. So we're going to add that. And why don't I go ahead and print active workbook. Active workbook dot name. So right now we've got 2 workbooks open. Because I've got a lot of printing happening here, I'm just going to disable some of these other printing lines because we're not currently talking about them. So now I should have just these 2 lines. We'll print the active workbook's name, and then we'll print the count. So here's book 2, the one we just opened. That was the active workbook. I only get 1 workbook as active. And by the way, this is application.active workbook, but that's one of those that you can leave the application off and it goes, you know what, you're going to use this enough. You don't have to put application in front of it. We're going to figure out what you mean by that. So only 1 active workbook at a time. Questions here? Okay. Now, this is going to kind of bring us back to not the last time we were together, but the time before we talked about variables. And we ended up talking about an object variable. The last kind of variable we talked about was an object variable. Anyone feel brave enough to kind of tell me something about an object variable, what an object variable is, or anything you remember about an object variable? It was the most complex kind of variable we talked about because it doesn't just hold a value, it does something different. But anybody remember what that was? Go ahead. Yeah, so it's like the object variable allows me to be a shortcut to some other object. The object variable isn't what actually holds the object. All the object variable holds is it holds the memory address where some other object is. So when I refer to the object variable, it goes, oh, this is just a nickname to an object somewhere else. That's what an object variable is. And here's going to be a really great place to use that kind of a variable. So let me come right here. And I'm going to declare dim. So making a variable. I'm going to declare WB as a workbook. I'm sorry, as an object. So I've made a new variable, and help me out. Before we do it as an object, what are some of the other data types? Just for a little review here, what's some of the other data types we could have? Throw one out. String. So string holds collection of characters. String is a variable length data type, meaning whatever I put into it determines how much memory it actually uses. It has 4 bytes of overhead to keep track of how long the string is, and then it takes 1 byte for whatever I put in. Okay, another type. Double. Double is a fixed data type. In other words, when I say double, it allocates 8 bytes of RAM, and that's all it's ever going to use. If I try to put more into it than will fit in 8 bytes of RAM, it doesn't say change somewhere else where you have more room. It says you can't put that in here. Do you remember the message it gives when you try to put something too big into a fixed data type size? Overflow. Says, yeah, this is overflow. I'm not going to do that because it would overflow. Okay, good. And this one handles what kind of data? Yeah, numbers, but specifically floating point numbers. So decimals allows it to handle decimals. Okay, another one. We had integer. Good. So integer handles what kind of data? Yeah, numbers again, but it's whole numbers. Yeah, you can't put 3.5 in there. It'll round it up to 4 if you try to do that. Integer takes 2 bytes. Not that that's important. Okay, so these are all different data types. And now we're doing one as object. So now what we're saying is we're allocating some memory. How much are we allocating? We're allocating just enough to hold the memory address of where some object is. But it's just a memory. It's holding a memory address from, sorry, it's a location in memory that is holding the address to a different location in memory. Now, here's where it becomes really neat. Because when I say workbooks.add, application.workbooks.add, not only does this add method create a new workbook and put it on the screen, it sends back to wherever it was called from, it sends back the memory address where it was created. That thing gets created somewhere in memory. And this method answers back and says, hey, this is where the object is. Now, the way I'm using it right now, I'm not catching it. It comes back and I'm not doing anything to catch it. And so it just kind of evaporates. I'm not doing anything with it. And so it disappears. The address, I mean, so I've lost what that address is. But I could say, all right, we want to set WB equal to. When I say set WB equal to, and then this call to this method, this still behaves the same way over here on this side. It says, all right, go create the address, but because this, or create the object, but because, I guess for the video, I should be pointing with the mouse. Because this evaluates to the address where the object was created, that value gets sent back to here. Just as if I had this, let me just kind of have a simpler parallel. Dim x as an integer, x equals 1 plus 1. What is it going to put into x right here? Yeah, it's going to evaluate what's on the right-hand side, and it's going to put that value over here. The same thing happens here. It evaluates what's in the right-hand side, and to figure out what that means, it has to actually create the worksheet, a workbook. It creates the workbook, and then it evaluates to the address where it got created, and then the address comes back and it gets stored into this. So it's really similar to what we're doing here. In fact, it's so similar, the full syntax here is let x equal 1 plus 1. It used to be in BASIC that you had to use the keyword let to make this thing happen as an assignment. It's still valid syntax here, by the way. I kind of actually like to use the keyword let there because to me, it sounds like the voice of God. Let x equal 1 plus 1. And then just it happens. It's like, wow. But there's kind of a difference between working with a primitive variable that just holds a value and an object variable that holds a reference to a different location in memory. And so when we are using an object variable to connect it up to an object, we use the keyword set. This was a design decision in the language to say, oh, you have to use a different keyword here. Oh boy, it'll take about 10 minutes to explain why that is. Do you want to hear it? Or do you want to just say objects use set, otherwise use let, or don't put anything? You don't have to, again, you don't have to put let in front of it, but it still works. There's a question here.
Yeah, I was just curious with the variable, what if you were to use WB for integer as well? Will it save it as the object or will it switch to integer?
Okay, let me quickly see if I understand what your question was. You're saying what would happen if we did this?
If I used WB as object and then I used dim WB as integer.
Oh, okay, so,
what happens with WB?
so if we had them both,
Right.
you mean like this? Yeah, it's not gonna let that, it's gonna say not a chance. It's gonna say duplicate definition of the variable, duplicate declaration in the current scope. Yeah, you get to pick one. Okay, here, I'm gonna give you the really brief explanation of why you have to use set. What do we print? Okay, quickly, let me introduce you to the other variable type that you have to understand to be able to get this. Let me dim, instead of dimming WB as object, here's another type I haven't showed you yet called variant. The variant data type, string data type has 4 bytes of overhead. In addition to the data you're storing, it takes 4 bytes to keep track of what you're storing. Variant over data type has 22 bytes of overhead. It's a lot of overhead for a variable. And it says, I'll do anything. I can do or be anything. You want me to be a string? I'll be a string. You want me to be an integer? Be a string. You want me to be a floating point number? Great. I want to be a fixed point number? I'll act like a fixed point. You want me to be an object? I'll act like an object. It will really behave anyway. There's a cost, and part of that cost is in the overhead that comes up. So because I've got this variable type that can be any kind, and again, if I leave off the as variant, you can remember the language is saying we want to guess at what you mean here. It's the same. If I don't give it a data type, it makes the variable of type variant. In this class, you are never going to do that. You are always going to give the type that you mean. I'm teaching you to do this right, and that's the right way to do it. But if I have this as a variant, let's not confuse. Let me go back to object on this one. Let me do a different example. Okay, so I've got a range as an object, and I'm going to say set RNG equal to the active cell. RNG dot address. Okay, I'm going to run right to there. I'm going to put this keyword stop in here. Now, this keyword stop is actually just a thing for debugging. I'm going to run this code. It got to the keyword stop and it actually stopped. It hasn't executed anything below stop. So it's executed everything up there and it stopped when I got there. It didn't terminate the program, it just suspended it. So we're now suspended. All the variables are still allocated, their values still, I can kind of poke around and see what's going on. So now that I'm here, I should be able to say, let me ask, oh, I printed it. I already did print it. Let me print it again. One of the neat things about VBA as a development environment is you can just kind of drag this current position or current statement indicator back up and then run it again. So it says that's A1. So that's exactly what I wanted to do. I can now say I can use RNG as a reference to that particular cell. I can set the value equal to 5, and it plugs the value 5 into that cell. But what if I just said I want to print the active cell? I'm going to come up here and print the active cell. Which property is that printing? First of all, which property did I tell it to print? I didn't tell it a property to print. How many properties are there of the active cell? Dozens. Yeah, a lot. That's the right answer. There's a lot. It didn't print them all. That would have been a reasonable thing to do. You didn't tell which one, print them all. But it didn't. It printed one of them. Which one did it print? It printed its default property. Not all objects. Some objects have a default property. And this is one. Range is one. If you don't tell it the property you mean, it thinks you mean value. And again, it's the philosophy of the language. If you haven't fully specified it, we're going to take our best guess at what you meant. And so because of this, and because we have that variant data type, Now, what kind of variable is this going to be? It'll be whatever we want it to be. You want to treat it like an object, it'll treat it like an object. And so, did someone say that's too much power? That's too much power. So same thing, right? We still get to the address here. But if we don't have the word set here, what does it mean? Should it treat this as an object variable? Or should it treat this as, should it look at that and go, oh, you mean the value? It's ambiguous. It does not know which one we could possibly mean here. And so because it's kind of set up to kind of fill in the blanks, they said, all right, if you want this to behave like an object variable, you have to say here, set. You know, I'm curious what happened if I said let here. I bet it would pick up the value, although I've never tried it. Oh, it went back to set. I want to go to let. Yeah. So by saying let, it goes, oh, well, you must not mean the object itself because you didn't say set here. And so it doesn't, so here it actually figures out the property that you mean. Here we're going to use the keyword set. So it's a long explanation for as to why you have to say set. If you don't put let, it assumes you mean let. But you have to say set if you want to bind an object variable onto an object. And the reason is because of this ambiguity that comes about because we have the variant data type and because there are default properties for some objects that it can get confused. I wish they didn't do that. I wish they just would have said, you know what? Do something different. What I really wish was always specify the property. But that's, you know, it was the 90s. When they were making this language, it was the 90s, and it seemed like a good idea. Maybe it was, I don't know. Questions? How many of you are saying, I really wish you would have said, you know, use set to bind an object variable on and moved on? Oh, really? No one? No one, really? Well, I'm going to have a high opinion of my instructional abilities. No one says that. Okay. All right. So where are we here? I guess it's okay to leave that code in. Okay, so we're dimming. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of. I'm going to get rid of this part here. We're dimming WB as an object. We are then binding that object variable onto the address of where this sheet ends up. And then now instead of printing, yeah, and then we can print off, you know, the name, and that would be the name of the one that's just created. But now we can now use WB as a reference to that worksheet that was just added, regardless of whether it remains active anymore. So before we were saying, let's just go ahead and close the active workbook. Active workbook, did we close it? Oh no, have we been creating a bunch of, let's see. I may just not have run it that often yet, because each time here we're adding it. So now let's just go ahead. I'm going to move my stop down to here. Let's run it to here. Okay, so we've got a new workbook. Here's book 3. I can now use WB as another way to get to that particular workbook. So let me just come in here and say WB dot save. I think I have to say save as. Oh, actually, let me say save as. I don't get any IntelliSense help here. So the IntelliSense is when it goes, it figures out, you know, what your options are and it gives you some choices. Here's the reason. When I say dim WB as object, that WB could hook up to any kind of object. It could hook up to a worksheet or to a workbook or to a range or to a chart or to the shape that holds a chart or to anything that's an object. It's allowed to hook up to any kind of object. As a result, my editor here doesn't know how to help me with save as. It doesn't know what object class to look at to know what to save, what are the possibilities for save as. So here's an interesting thing. Instead of object, I can say workbook. So I can say workbook or range or worksheet. These are all specific kinds of object variables. It doesn't change what happens in memory at all. It's the same things happening in memory. It's allocating enough memory to keep track of where an object is. But now this is going to do two things. It's going to say this is now the only kind of object that we're allowed to hook up to is a did I say workbook? Is a workbook object. If I tried to hook it onto a range, it would just say you're not allowed to do that. It's not that kind of object. But the real benefit now of doing that is that while I'm writing, I'm going to get IntelliSense help, because now when I say WB dot, it goes, oh, you can say anything that you could say after any workbook. And so it's going to show me this. So I can say save as, space, and now it gives me all the help of what I need here. And so I can give it the name that I want to save it as. I think I'm just going to save this in my downloads. Let me get the path to my downloads. Will this give me the path to my downloads? Oh, it won't. Evil thing. Oh, and that's been disabled by the administrator. Okay. Save as, I'll type in what I think it is. C:\users. Oops. /gallen2. You guys could like do it at C:\/ if you want to, but I don't have permissions on this computer to write at the root of the C drive. /downloads. /test.xlsx. That may give an error or it may work. We'll find out here. Print out the name, :space, concatenate. Whew. So we're going to add a workbook. We are going to save the, we're going to print the name. We're going to save it and print the name again. It should give us a different name. All right. There's book 4. Yeah, so it was book 4. We saved it, and now it's test.xlsx. Okay. So we've got, we got the ability to control workbooks, through code. Question here.
If you wanted to save it as a different type of file, like XLSN or
Yeah, what if I wanted to save this as a different type, XLSM or whatever? Yeah, this is not an easy answer, I'm afraid. So I will keep pointing in the right direction without actually giving you the full answer. It's another argument to tell it what type. The default type is for a regular Excel workbook. If I come here and give it, the next argument is the file format. And that file format is a number. 53, I think, is XLSM. And there probably is like a built-in constant, like a variable name that means 53 that's more human readable. I don't know what it is. I'm not entirely sure it's 53. I think it's in the 50s. So yeah, you could say make it a CSV file by putting the right number here. And a little Googling would help you find what those numbers are. Okay, anything else you want to know about manipulating workbooks? Oh, probably how to close them. So I probably should close this one as well. So we're stopping, we're putting the name, let's close it. wb.close. By the way, now that I know the name of it, I could actually refer to it by its name. Oh, we want to see something else about the workbooks collection. Let's just take a look at this. Maybe we won't actually put it into the example. Workbooks.count. There are 5 workbooks open right now. The most recently opened workbook is the one I just named to test.xlsx. So I can refer to the elements of the workbooks collection by their ordinal position. So this should be the very first workbook that was opened in this instance of Excel. For me, it's air traffic passenger statistics.xlsm. So I started up Excel, I opened up the workbook that we're working on for here, and so that's the first one in the collection. The order in which the workbooks get open in Excel is the order in which they're in the collection. So that's number 1. That was the first one open. Now, some of you might have said, hey, the first one I opened was the same one, but I'm getting something else here that says personal XLSB. Anyone say that? So we got just one person. When you record a macro, we didn't talk about this when you're recording a macro, but when you record a macro, if I was to say, let me stop the code here and come back here, developer, record macro. One of my options, let me zoom in here, Windows. one of my options here is where to store this. We are always going to store it in the workbook we're doing in this class. There's another option, personal macro workbook. As soon as I save a macro into the personal macro workbook, here's what it does. Excel creates a workbook called personal.xlsb. It's just a different kind of workbook, different format. It's a little bit more efficient than XLSM in terms of holding code and being able to get at it quickly. It then puts that like in the same place, somewhere right next to Excel. It's not putting it anywhere in your space. It's like // Windows / program files / Office / Excel / something. And it's somewhere deep in there's where it puts it. And then every time you open Excel after that, the first thing it does is open that workbook. Because by putting a file in your personal macro workbook, you're saying, I always want this macro to be available. And every macro is available as long as it's in an open workbook. You can run any macro you want. It doesn't have to be the active workbook. As long as it's in an open workbook, that macro is available. And so by putting it in the personal macro, once you create that, you put it in the personal macro workbook, every time you open Excel, first thing it does, open that personal macro workbook, so those macros are available to you. So that's why that is the first one that's the first one in your collection. Okay, I should be able, there's 5 of them, so I should be able to look at the 5th one. That should be test, because that's the one that I most recently added and named. So when I have a collection of objects, I can always refer to it by its ordinal position. If they're named objects, I can usually refer to it by its name as well. And so that's, the name of that workbook is test.xlsx, and it seems kind of strange to identify a worksheet by its name and then ask for its name, but that's just to show you the code executes. We could use that to say how many sheets there are in it. And that's a more reasonable line of code to write. So when you've got these collections of objects, you can identify them by their individual number. You can identify them by the name if they're named. If the objects in the collection have names, that's generally something that you can do. Okay, that's the workbook, working with workbooks and the workbooks object. Questions? All right, let's just go ahead and kind of conclude this by, instead of saving this, I'll comment that line out. Let's just go ahead and delete it. So wb.close. And you'll see that we have a save changes parameter here. I really don't want to save the changes, so I'm going to say false. So if I say false, close false, that means we're not going to save the changes. And incidentally, you can put the names of the parameters in here. Save. But you have to do, the syntax is a little bit different. Save changes. Is that what it was? Yeah, save changes. Save changes, you say : equals false. And that's because we're really not doing an assignment here. We're just saying this is the name of the argument that I'm putting in here. So now that should create it, open it, and give you an automation error. So let me go ahead and just put false there. I'm not sure what I had wrong there. That looked pretty good to me. Let me try it again. Close false, that's definitely right. Okay, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. I'm not sure why that's not working. Did anyone try that and it worked for them? You tried it, it worked for you. Anyone else? Anyone else get the same error I'm getting? In the back, you're getting the same error?
Is it just freaking out because it's trying to print the name of the workbook?
Oh, maybe so. Oh, that's probably exactly what it is. And I didn't realize that. So let's go here and let's put the stop here. Yeah, I think you're probably exactly right. Yeah, if the close is the problem. Yeah, it was getting to the next line and I didn't realize I was trying to refer to it, after it was closed. So let's go ahead and put this, just comment this line out. Yeah, so it's closing it and it's not saving the change. Thank you so much. You get a gold star for today. Gold stars don't have any effect on your grade, but you can tell your mom today you got a gold star in your class. Okay. So worksheets are really similar. Like this one's getting, let's see, oh, we're already doing something with worksheets. Are we something with worksheets here? Oh yeah, we already added worksheets. We can do the same thing here. Before we delete that worksheet, let's just kind of do the same thing in here. We'll do this quickly. Dim WS as a worksheet. We're adding it, so let's set WS equal to the results of this add. WS.name equals salary. And let's stop right there to see it before we delete the sheet. So somewhere, application.workbooks, let's see. Oh, I was still running the code. So let's stop this. We'll run it here again. We hit that stop. We've created a sheet. We've called it salary. We are about to delete it, but we've paused here long enough to see that we can manipulate the sheet now with that same object variable, that same kind of object variable. Right, this one is only allowed to connect onto worksheet objects. This one's only allowed to connect onto workbook objects. And again, the whole point of why I like to do that is because it gives me the ability to say WS dot and get the help. What's next? What can I do here? Questions? What else would you want to do with a worksheet? We're adding a worksheet, we're deleting it. We've seen how to even turn off the screen or the display alerts so it doesn't alert you. You're doing it. I guess that's it. Okay, well, let's do this. I'm going to activate my air traffic control. And this air traffic passenger statistics, and we'll make a new one. This one's getting kind of cluttered, so let's start again. Iterate. Because I can refer to those objects by their ordinal position, and because I can count how many there are in the collection of objects, watch this. Let me dim WS as a worksheet. And let's do this. What have we seen in terms of loops? We haven't really talked about loops here. I've introduced you to the do loop. So we'll use the syntax we're already familiar with. Do and loop. Got to be careful because that's an endless loop. Let's dim X as an integer. And we're going to loop until X is equal to X is greater than or equal to worksheets dot count. Oh no, hit help. Don't ever hit help. It's guaranteed to be no help. Until, okay. So now let me give X a value to start, X equals 1. And I'm going to say set WS equal to worksheets sub X. So the first time through here, X is 1. And so we're going to bind our WS variable onto worksheet number 1. Then I'm just going to print WS.name. Then we're going to increment X. X equals X plus 1. Okay, let me just talk you through this loop. So we're starting here, X equals 1. Great, we put a value 1 somewhere in memory. We're going to bind now our variable WS onto the first worksheet in the collection. So I have my active sheet here. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and activate that sheet. So here's a little trick. I'm going to say this workbook dot activate. So we already saw there's a kind of a shortcut to get to a particular workbook called active workbook. What was it? Is that what it was? Active book? I think it's active workbook. This workbook isn't which one's active. This workbook is the workbook that contains the code that's executing. So whatever workbook holds this line of code, WORK, whatever whatever workbook holds this line of code, that's the workbook that this refers to. So this is going to be the air traffic passenger statistics. Doesn't matter where it is in the collection, whatever, that's the one we're talking about. So we're going to activate that. So if we don't say the workbook now in our code later, it's going to assume the active workbook. This one will be active. So there are how many sheets here? There are 3 sheets. First time through, X is 1. We're going to bind our worksheet variable onto the first workbook. We're going to print the name that should print air traffic passenger statistics. X then goes to 2. We're going to check to see if X is greater than or equal to worksheets.count. What is worksheets.count? Yeah, how many are in this workbook? 3. So is this condition true? X greater than 2 greater than 3? It's not. In fact, I don't want greater than equal, so I want just greater than. So that's false. So we stay in the loop. Now X is 2. And so we are going to open up worksheet number 2. I'm not going to open it. We're just going to bind on to this variable. We use that to print it off. So this should print each of the 3 sheets' names. And iterate. And so it's gone through and printed each one of those sheets' names. Okay. On a show of hands, just show me your hands. 5 meaning I so totally understand what you just did. 0 meaning, is it too late to drop the class? Show me how you feel about that, what we just did. I'm seeing 3s, I'm seeing some 5, 5, 5, 5, 3s. No 4s, 3s or 5s, at least what I saw. Okay, so we're gonna get familiar with this kind of a loop. In fact, once we start talking about loops in particular, there's some simpler syntax, do the same kinds of thing. But it's okay to be at a 3 right now. So yeah, I didn't see any 0s. That's good. Maybe you already dropped the class if you would have been a 0 here. If you were just afraid to hold up no fingers or 1 finger in this case, this is probably a good time to get together with me, get together with the TA and say, all right, help me see what we're doing here. So the point is now, if I had something that I wanted to do on every single sheet of a workbook, I can now do that right here. I could put into, let's see, do I have anything on A1 here? Nothing there. Oh yeah, A1's already got, let's just make A1 bold. That won't be too damaging. I can now say the worksheet that we're currently talking about dot range A1 dot font dot bold equals true. So what that's going to do is it's going to go across every single worksheet in this workbook. It's going to refer to cell A1 on each one of those sheets, and it's going to change it to bold. I'll run that. And now we can see that's bold. Does it actually show us that it's bold other than just looking bold? Oh, on the home maybe. Yeah, the bold is selected there. If I come here to charts and look at A1, the bold is selected. If I come to this last sheet, A1, the bold is selected. So when I have a collection of objects and I got to do something to all of them, it's possible to do it. And this is one way. Was it a question? No? Questions? Let's look at one more kind of object. And I'm going to copy this. Am I going to copy this? No, yeah, I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to just make this again. I'll call this iterate 2. Now, on our charts sheet, we actually have a collection of, well, we've got lots of charts. I don't know how many there are. There's a bunch of charts on this sheet, 12 or something. I don't know. Charts are their own objects, but as it turns out, they're actually, to live on a worksheet, they have to put that chart in another kind of object called a shape. And so these are actually, on the worksheet, there's a collection of shapes that hold all these charts. And so let me, instead of dimming this workbook.activate. All right, and then I'm just going to say set WS equal to worksheets. I want the one that says that is charts. So now, from here on, my worksheet, my WS is going to refer to the worksheet called charts. In fact, let's do this. I'm not going to require myself to activate the sheet. Instead, I'm going to say, I don't care which one's active, but I'm going to connect on this object variable onto the workbook that holds this code. It's my air passenger statistics workbook. And in that workbook, the worksheet called charts. So now it won't matter which worksheets. I don't really care which one's active. I'm going to say, go directly to that workbook, directly to that worksheet. So now let me dim SHP as a shape. So leave X equal to 1. Did I not declare X? I sure should have declared X. Oh, it is. Oh, there it is. Thank you. Okay. Now I'm going to set SHP equal to my worksheet, my charts worksheet, dot shapes sub X. I'm going to print sh.name. I think shapes have names. And I'm going to do until X is greater than the shapes collection on my worksheet. Oops. Count. This should now just print off the names of the shapes. That doesn't surprise me. Where is it? Thank you. So they are called chart 4, 5, 6, 7. Those are great names. Those are the default names that when you create a chart, it gives the shape that holds it a name that tells you it's a chart. Okay, so let's suppose, kind of just to drive home this fact that I might want to process all objects in the collection similarly. Let's just say I want to shift all of these up. So I'm going to say SHP dot top equals SHP dot top minus 10. I'm going to change the top property of each one of these shapes. By the way, what is 10? I don't know. It's a little bit. I'm not even sure what measurement we're using here, but it's probably something like 200 or 300 as to where the top of this one is. So I'm just going to shift these up a little bit. It should be enough that you can see it move. So I'm putting a new value in the top property. What is it going to be? It's going to be the old value of the top property minus 10. Let's run it. Eventually, that's going to have an error because you can't put a negative number into a top. Oh, apparently you can put a negative number into a top, and then it just puts it to 0. So I could, of course, move these the other way just by adding instead of subtracting. And we should be able to kind of push them back down. Questions? Yes.
Yeah. Obviously, you don't want to be moving your charts or rolling things over and over again. So your loop until, how do you get it fully come out and stop?
So the question is, why is it stopping?
Why is it not stopping? Because I'm doing like a walkthrough, and it'll go through and move every single chart up, and then it'll go back to chart 4 and move it up again.
So, okay, so you're stepping one line at a time. We really haven't covered that yet. And we're kind of at the end of class. Let's, why don't you come on down, let's take a look at it while I'm getting. All right, folks, that's an introduction to working with built-in objects. Thanks for coming, class dismissed. Oh, what time are we meeting on Wednesday? We are not meeting on Wednesday. Thank you very much.